That brings me to volume, which if you never really understood what volume actually means, the volume of a three-dimensional figure is the number of non-overlapping unit cubes of a given size that will exactly fill the interior. So this is sort of like a Rubik's Cube, and how many of those little individual cubes will you see to make this cube? Well, the answer is 27 if you bother to count them. And one way to calculate that is to take 3 times 3 times 3. This distance, and this distance. So that works for these prisms, like 10 by 12 by 8. You just take length times width times height to figure out the volume. And it's the same thing with a cube. You could call it length, width, and height, but since they're all the same side length, you can just say s cubed instead. When we talk about the volume of a cylinder, for example, we're just going to take the area of the base and multiply it by the height. So that changes a little bit in terms of which figure we're looking at. Here we're looking just exclusively at cylinders, so remember that the area of the circle is the pi r squared. That's where this comes from down here. That's the area of the base, pi r squared. And we're going to multiply that by the height. They're going to tell us to give answers in terms of pi and round to the nearest tenth. So 9 times 4 is 36. That's the area of the base. And our height, notice the 90-degree angle here, is 36. So our volume is 216 centimeters cubed. We just took 6 times 4 times 9. And that's our unit for volume. For a cube with edge length of 8, we could either say 8 times 8 times 8, or simply 8 cubed. They're going to be the same thing. Our answer would be 512 feet cubed. So the ice cream cake takes a couple steps. The first one is to figure out the volume of the cake in feet. Then we're going to convert the units. Since we want to cancel out feet cubed, I'm going to put that on the bottom, 0.134 feet cubed. And that equals 1 gallon. And then they want to know about the weight given a certain density. So I'm going to put 1 gallon on the bottom so they cancel out. And on top, I'm going to put the 4.73 pounds. I'm going to put lbs for pounds. So if you multiply across the bottom and divide by the product of the bottom, and I just noticed they asked you to estimate the volume in gallons somewhere along the way, and then the weight of the cake. So this many gallons and this many pounds. I just rounded it to the nearest whole number there. So for these, we have to find the area of the base and multiply it by the height. So we're given these values. Since the diameter is 12, the distance all the way across, we know that the radius is half of that. This is the formula, pi r squared times height. We plug in for r, and they told us to give the answer in terms of pi and round to the nearest tenth. Since it was 1130.97, we round up to 1131. Here on the right, we use the same formula, pi r squared times h. They directly gave us the radius this time. So we plug that in, 45 pi, or 141.4 feet cubed. For number 2, we're finding the volume of a pyramid. So our formula is 1/3 times the area of the base times the height. So to find the area of the base, that's what the capital B represents, we figure out what shape this is. Here it's a rectangle, so we use length times width to figure out the area. So we can replace that capital B with a 24. Next up is the height, and this is the distance from the vertex at the top all the way down so that it forms a 90-degree angle with the base. And this we are given is 17. So if I multiply this straight across, I get that the volume is 136 inches cubed, because volume uses the unit cubed. It's 3 dimensions. Number 6, same formula. Volume is equal to 1/3 times the area of the base times the height. The area of the base for this one is a circle, so that's pi r squared, which 9 times 9 is 81 times pi. So that's what we can plug in for the base. Then, the height is the distance from the vertex to the base, so that it forms a 90-degree angle. So we can plug in 14. So then we just multiply straight across, and we have 2 answers. One, we leave in terms of pi. That's 378 pi centimeters cubed for the volume. Or we can multiply it by pi and round to the nearest tenth. So these are our 2 possible answers. We use the same formula for number 7, and this time when we find the area of the base, we aren't directly given the radius. 24 is equal to the diameter here. But we know the relationship between diameter and radius. The radius is exactly half of the diameter. So that's what we can plug in here. This becomes pi times 12 squared, or 144 pi for the area of the base. So then we have to plug in the height, which is the distance between the vertex and the base so that it forms a 90-degree angle, and that is given here as 30 inches. So I can multiply straight across, and my first answer is 1,440 pi inches cubed. And if I actually multiply out the pi and round to the nearest tenth, here's what I get. For 13, we're going to use the same formula. The volume is equal to 1/3 times the area of the base times the height. The base here is a rectangle, so we use length times width. We can plug in 48 there, and our height is 10. So if we multiply straight across, we get 160 feet cubed. Then for 10.8, we're going to find the volume of a sphere. The formula is 4/3 pi r cubed. For these hemisphere problems, though we skip number 2, you find the volume of the entire sphere and you just cut it in half. But here we have a full sphere, and the radius we know is 1. So we can plug in a 1 there, and 1 times 1 times 1 is just 1. So we can get the answer as 4/3 pi meters cubed, because it told us to leave the answer in terms of pi. Number 6, we're only looking at the surface area, so we have to use a different formula. 4 pi r squared is our formula. They give us 16 yards as the diameter. That's the distance all the way across the sphere. So the radius is going to be half of that, 8. So we can substitute that for r. And when we multiply straight across, we get 256 pi yards squared. Even though we're looking at a sphere, area is always in 2 dimensions. Switching back to volume for number 13. If the diameter is 18, the radius is half of that, 9. We plug that in. If we take 9 and we cube it, 9 times 9 times 9, that gives us 729. Multiply that by 4/3, and we get 972 pi centimeters cubed. Volume is in 3 dimensions. 17, switching back to surface area. This time they give us the radius, 21 inches. We can plug that in. If you square it and multiply by 4, 1,764 pi inches squared for the surface area. And here's a list of all the formulas from 10.7 and 10.8.